So good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Amer. I'm the Deputy General Counsel at the Copyright Office, and we'd like to welcome you to the second week of hearings in the Section 1201 rulemaking. Before we begin Class 5, I'd just like to go over a few logistical items. These should be familiar to many of you. So those of us on the government side will pose questions, and we will call on participants to respond. We found it works pretty well for people to use the raise hand feature on Zoom to indicate that they would like to speak, but if that's not working for you for whatever reason, feel free to just raise your hand and we can call on you after that as well. We have a lot of topics to cover, as you may expect, so we would ask that you please try to focus your responses to the particular question asked, and we ask that you keep your comments relatively brief. We'll provide a sort of short roadmap at the beginning of this session to just give you an idea of what topics we're planning to cover. In addition, today's event is being live streamed, and it's being recorded and transcribed by a court reporter. The video and transcript will be posted on the Copyright Office website. And so we would ask that everyone please try to speak clearly and to mute your audio when you're not speaking to assist with the recording and the transcription. Finally, on Wednesday afternoon, we are going to be holding an audience participation session. For those watching on the public link, you can sign up to participate in Wednesday's session using the SurveyMonkey link that we're going to provide in the chat box. And then on Wednesday afternoon, those who have signed up can join the audience participation session using the same link that they would use to view the sessions for that day. Okay, so today's first hearing is on Class 5, preservation of audiovisual works. Before we begin, I would like to invite first my Copyright Office colleagues to introduce themselves. So Mr. Bell and Mr. Riley.
Good morning, everybody. Jordana Rubel, Assistant General Counsel.
Good morning, everyone. John Riley, Assistant General Counsel.
And Mr. Zambrano Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everyone. This is Luis Zambrano Ramos. I'm a policy analyst at NTIA. And now I would like to invite the participants to introduce themselves. Let's please start with the proponents of the proposed exemption. So Mr. Band.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Band. I represent the Library Copyright Alliance.
Ms. McCleskey.
Sarah McCleskey, Hofstra University, Head of Resource and Collection Services in the University Library.
Dr. Steffen.
Hi, yes, my name is James Steffen. I'm from Emory University in Atlanta, and I am the Film and Media Studies librarian and the head of the humanities team.
And Ms. Tanas.
I'm Giselle Tanas. I'm the Film and Media Services librarian at the University of California at Berkeley.
And let's turn please to those opposing the proposed exemption. So we have Mr. Evian. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. If not, I apologize. Ms. Nelson from Swank.
Bill Evian, Vice President CIO at Swank Motion Pictures. And Swank Motion Pictures represents the major studios, 100+ studios in the non-theatrical space, which libraries are part of.
And Ms. Nelson. Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Good morning, Barbara Nelson, Swank Motion Pictures. I am Senior Vice President overseeing the studio relations of the 100 studios and distributors that Mr. Evian mentioned previously.
And Mr. Marks and Mr. Taylor.
Morning, Dean Marks. I'm outside counsel to Advanced Access Content System, LLC, AACS LLC, and the DVD Control Association. Thanks.
Good morning. This is David Taylor. I'm outside counsel to DVD Copy Control Association and to the Advanced Access Content System Licensing Administrator.
And Mr. Williams.
Good morning, Matt Williams for Mitchell, Silverberg, and Knupp. I'm representing the joint creators and copyright owners.
Great, thank you. And so to start off with the questions for Class 5, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Jordana Rubel.
Good morning again, everybody. I want to walk us quickly through a number of topics that we plan to cover this morning. I'm anticipating an interesting and lively discussion, so please do your parts to make it so. I'll give you a quick outline of the topics so you know what to expect, and we'll ask you to please reserve your comments on a particular topic for the questions that specifically address that topic. The first topic that we're going to discuss, we're going to talk about the problems librarians are seeing with damaged and deteriorating DVDs and Blu-ray discs. We'll talk about when CSS is used on DVDs and whether it is really necessary to shift content that is currently stored on DVDs and Blu-ray discs to non-disc format for the purpose of preservation. Second, I want to talk about Section 108 and whether that is sufficient to address preservation concerns, and also how the issue of what we've called preemptive preservation plays into that analysis. Third, I want to talk about the market check requirement and whether motion pictures that are available through streaming services should be considered viable alternatives. Fourth, I'd like to talk about the off-premises use and any other limitations on use. And finally, I want to discuss the licensing market for motion pictures and how the proposed exemption would affect that market. And in connection with that last topic I described, we have two short presentations that panelists are going to make. So let's go ahead and get started. Please rest assured that we have read and have carefully considered and will continue to carefully consider the written comments that were provided. But I do want to start off by giving the librarians who are panelists on this morning's call a chance to describe in their own words what some of the issues they're seeing with deterioration and degradation of Blu-ray discs or DVDs. So anyone who's interested in speaking to that point, go ahead and use your raise hand function, or you can even just raise your hand up like that so I'll know to call on you. Dr. Steffen, you want to start us off?
Yes. Is it okay if I present some slides in addition to my verbal comments? If not, I can just speak.
Yeah, it would be better if you just spoke. We asked for participants to submit things in advance so we'd have a chance to take a look at them. So
Okay.
if you could just give us your oral comments, that would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so over the past few years, I've become aware of increasing problems with disc rot affecting a number of commercially pressed DVDs. This includes from a wide range of producers, such as the Criterion Collection, producers overseas. One of the ones which I found the most discussion about was Warner DVDs produced between 2006 and 2009 at the Cinram plant in Pennsylvania, which included like BBC, some independent producers, and of course, Warner Brothers. So I started my own investigation of our collection, and we have like some 700 50 or so discs that were produced during this period, I've started investigating them. And of those, about 198 were out of print. And in my inspection of those, about 50% of those, 52 so far, display signs of disc rot, like discoloration. And of the ones that I physically inspected, also 14 were no longer playable. And to give you one example, we have a DVD of Heartbreak House, which is part of the Shaw collection that was released by the BBC. And that one is no longer playable. And there are no real viable replacement options. So the disc is out of print. There were never any subsequent pressings made. The disc, the title is also not available for streaming for academic purposes, but it's also not available for streaming for individual purposes. I think there's a high likelihood because it was part of this bad pressing that all or almost all of the copies available in libraries will be completely deteriorated in a matter of time. And there may be no way in the future for the public to access and study this particular film. And it's also the only adaptation of this particular play, Heartbreak House by Shaw, that was commercially released on DVD. So it really leaves people with no options for access and study.
Ms. Tanaz?
Thank you. I wanted to speak briefly to some of the deterioration that we see in our collection because of use. And our collection is used exclusively by our students and instructors. So UC Berkeley users, as well as some researchers who come to use content within our building. We do not allow any researchers or authors to take content out of our space. We are very controlled with our physical lending. So what we have typically seen over the past years is a wearing away at the spindle at the core of the disc. The plastic will start to chip with normal wear and tear to the point where it can become, you can try to sand a few times, but it does eventually become unplayable. We also see separation of the polycarbonate protective layer from the data layer. This happens also with normal wear and tear, removing the disc from a case, for example, or if there is some kind of oxidation or moisture, whether that happened when the disc was being produced, or in our case, we had a devastating flood in 2018. And we are anticipating, this is something we've seen yet, but that there could be some separation that results from that. So some of the degradation is both from the normal wear and tear on the disc, but also what James spoke to very eloquently earlier.
And Ms. McCluskey?
Good morning. I'd just like to speak briefly to the wear and tear issue in terms of players. So our discs also only circulate to Hofstra faculty for use in the classroom, and students and outsiders can use them in the library only. And we find that the discs, now that people are mainly playing them on an external DVD drive or on a laptop type drive, is much more destructive, much more likely to damage the discs. And when we had DVD players in all the classrooms with the specific tray for loading the disc to play. Also, just the packaging that discs come in makes them prone to damage. I think we've probably all broken one just trying to get it out of the package, the little pop out. And so it's a fragile medium, and I think that's our sort of our main concern with that.
Just sticking with the librarians for another minute. were any of these issues that cause degradation or damage surprising to you, or were those concerns that you might have had at the time when you decided to purchase the content in that format? Ms. Tanas?
I've been very surprised with discs that have worked well for us in the past, that we have demonstrated circulation statistics on, specifically with the separation of the polycarbonate protective layer from the data layer. So that's not something that seems to be associated with the removal necessarily. It's not like somebody tugged it too hard, but would seem to be something that happened over time that I did not expect and did not receive as part of my audiovisual training. And I was not kind of forewarned that this is something that we expect to see happen. I would say that's also the case with some of the spindles. Some are made better than others. And so the center core of the discs, some are, you know, I don't know really the technical term because I was not trained on this. It is a surprise. Some are have like a gap in the middle of the clear plastic, and some are solid plastic through and through. And what I have noticed just kind of in handling many, many discs, we have a 25,000 disc collection, is that those that have, you know, those that are hollow in the center are more prone to this kind of cracking.
Mr. Marks, I'm assuming you'd like to respond to a point that somebody's already made.
Thank you so much. It was just one point on the Warner Brothers disc rot. I think the primary problem from the problems with the manufacturing were with HD DVDs, which was an initial format that was competitive with Blu-ray discs. I would say format may even be considered today, just like beta versus VHS. That was and looking in the Wikipedia entry and checking with some Warner Brothers, the Wikipedia entry libraries decided to do. The problem was primarily with these DVDs with format DVDs. I'm not saying that there's never been any problems with individual DVDs, but I just wanted to make that clarification that that problem with lots of titles and seem to have been more on the DVD format in 2006 and 8.
Mr. Marks, I was able to understand most of what you said, but your audio is coming in just a little bit choppy. It might.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is this any better?
I think so, actually. But I do believe the court reporter was able to pick up what you said, but for future comments, that sounds much better.
Thank you so much. And I'll just summarize just one sentence that I think that primary problem from 2006 to 2008 of Warner Brother discs was the HD DVD format. And I'm not aware of any titles that were put out in the HD DVD format that weren't also put out in the standard DVD. That's helpful.
Dr. Stefan?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I am talking about DVDs, which of course, you know, I physically inspected myself. The reason why I became aware of the issue is when I started researching the Criterion Collection Blu-rays, which were suffering from bronzing. It was a limited number of titles. I came across comments in the home theater forum, which are, you know, it's a public fan forum basically, where many people were reporting on this issue. They were inspecting their own collection. And so these are DVDs in private collections, and my findings match what the private collectors are reporting in terms of the high percentage of discs failing. But I guess the point I just wanted to emphasize is that it's not just the Warner Brothers, that there's other discs that are suffering from accelerated disc rot. We don't know the full extent of it, which is what's concerning, I think.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, thank you. I did want to address the Criterion example. I mean, the Criterion Blu-ray did have a problem, and Criterion put in a replacement program for those titles that needed to be replaced back in 2014. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is that disc rot can occur because of either manufacturing problems or storage problems. And just like anything else that has a manufacturing problems, it will happen. So, I mean, it shouldn't be of surprise that things are sometimes imperfect, but they are indeed replaceable. And as far as Heartbreak Hotel, I think it's a far stretch to suggest that anything that's in digital format will be forever lost in this time and era that if you look hard enough, you can find almost anything in the internet age. So I don't think that's quite exactly a statement. And as far as things going out of print, things may go out of print, but they do in fact come back, whether it be an anniversary set, a new format, anything that, you know, people enjoy. People figure out, particularly the copyright owners, how to make more money off it by redistributing it.
We're just going to take a couple more comments on this point because we got a lot of other things to cover as well. Ms. Tanas, you've been waiting for a little while. Oh, you're still on mute.
I think I may have jumped line ahead of Sarah because I already made some comments now. Okay. I did want to speak to some of the production issues when we're looking at a set of DVDs. So we've had several television series where some of the discs may be fine, and one of the discs in particular does not work. And you can buy a couple different copies of that set and find one that does. So there's this kind of unpredictability of these forums and these lists where we might be able to go back and check and see there's been issues reported with this certain disc. There is just variation with that I've seen kind of on the micro level with particular titles.
Ms. McCluskey?
I'd just like to address your question of whether we expected deterioration. And I would say that as librarians, we are very familiar with format upgrade, format replacement. We have gone from film to U-matic to VHS to DVD to Blu-ray to streaming, and we have purchased content multiple times, the same thing, and we have no problem with that. That is to be expected. Our problem is when we cannot replace. So.
And Mr. Williams, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, but trust me, Mr. Band, we will have plenty of time to come to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just quickly, we had some comments in footnotes 32 and 33 of our filing about the availability of some of these titles. And with respect to the Warner Brothers catalog, some of those titles in the footnotes we reference are available for manufacture on demand. So if there is an issue with disc rot on those titles, they can essentially be purchased through Amazon and printed in an individualized basis. Not saying that would cover every single title we've heard about today, but with respect to Warner Brothers, there is a lot of availability out there. So that's the only point I wanted to make on that.
Mr. Zambrano Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Bell. This question is for the proponents. Once you acquire a DVD or Blu-ray, can you talk about the conditions that these DVDs or Blu-rays are kept inside the libraries? Thank you.
Ms. Tanas?
In our facility, temperature is relatively controlled and we track humidity I mentioned before, we had a devastating flood, and floods are not a rare occurrence in libraries. I would also say that most libraries don't necessarily have the capacity to temperature control or to check for humidity. We're an R1, so we're a large institution. We have a preservation department that advises us on climatic issues. The other issue is that when we circulate to our instructors, they may be held in unideal conditions. You know, it might be in a kitchen while somebody's boiling pasta. So while we have some control, you know, in our facility, we have a great amount of control in that we don't circulate for students to take home. So there's less use outside of our controlled environment. But going out to the classroom, you know, things can be left in cars, for example. But that's not so much the case for us.
All right, we're going to change gears a little bit. This is a more overarching question. The opponents have argued here that the proposed exemption seeks to take an existing exemption for out-of-date software and apply it in the context of motion pictures that may no longer be sold on discs, but that those two are completely different animals. What are the differences between out-of-date software and motion pictures that are relevant to the office's analysis? And I'm not sure, Mr. Williams, if your raised hand is a holdover, or if you have something to respond to that question.
It was a holdover, but I can respond quickly to that as well. I think with software, take your word processing software, for example, the average consumer isn't looking to use a 10-year-old version of their word processing software if they can get the most up-to-date version. And that's just not true of motion pictures. I mean, a movie was made when it was made, and people still want to watch it and enjoy it and love it today. Not that people can't enjoy older versions of software programs, but it's just not an equivalency when it comes to demand. And so, especially with respect to off-premises uses, motion pictures are quite different, I would say, from normal computer software programs. So that was the main point we wanted to make there.
And Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I would just point out to what we had written in our comments that the distribution of movies is a far more dynamic creature. It is it's windowed, it has multiple layers. I've already said that when a movie is released one time, it may be remastered and reissued again. You just don't see that kind of robustness, dynamic marketplace with computer software. And you don't see computer software necessarily the creators going back 3 or 4 times trying to put it into a new marketplace.
Mr. Band?
I would certainly agree that for many titles, many movie titles sort of don't go out of date, that there is a continuing market. It might be a dwindling market, but that the market does continue in a more robust way than it does for software. But there's a lot of titles out there. There's a lot of video of one sort or another, and for a substantial chunk, the market does disappear, and those aren't coming back. They're not going to be re-released. But those titles, even though they have virtually no enduring entertainment value, they do have enduring cultural and research value. And it's that subset that we're interested in. We're not, obviously, the Disney films are going to be re-released over and over and over again, and we're not concerned about the windowing and, however Disney tries to maximize its revenue by creating artificial scarcity. We're not talking about that. We're talking about niche films, foreign films, TV programs that that are dated, that no one is really going to ever release again, but that do have research value, and that's the focus of this petition.
Related to that point, there was a factual issue raised in the written comments about when CSS is actually used on a DVD. And as I understood it, the assertion was that CSS isn't typically used unless they expect it to sell at least 5,000 copies of the disc. So I'm curious to hear more about that assertion, and also whether there's some similar limitation on the use of AACS.
The issue
Mr.
of,
Taylor?
sorry, I'm so sorry. Yes, the issue of when CSS is applied and not applied, it is multifaceted. So the one issue which we identified was that when it was going to be what at the time would be a minimum print of 5,000 copies, then we saw that creators were more likely to insist on CSS being applied. CSS is typically applied, as far as I understand it, at the replicator level. The titles that were identified in the comments, they were not ever released in massive numbers, probably not even above the 500 level. And so it would be difficult to imagine that a creator who probably was just trying to get something out into the marketplace would pay the additional fees for the CSS licensing. As far as AACS, all AACS Blu-rays, all Blu-rays contain AACS. That is no longer an option, and we've kind of cleaned that up so that the marketplace is more consistent.
Can you point us to any written source that discusses the procedure for determining whether CSS will be used on a DVD?
I would have to get back to you. I had to do a substantial amount of resource of searches and kind of like cobble this together, and I'm happy to provide that to the office later.
Thank you. Another overarching question, and then we'll move on to discussing Section 108. The proposed exemption would allow essentially something that you could describe as space shifting, converting from the disc into a digital copy. Why is that necessary for preservation? Why couldn't you copy the content from a damaged DVD onto another DVD, which would at least provide some additional time that the content could be viewed? Mr. Band?
Right. So I was talking to Mr. Marks and Mr. Williams about this the other day, and here I have one hand, and basically what you would be suggesting is, this is like preservation with one hand tied behind your back. Like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to make a preservation copy that within 20 years you'd have to make another preservation copy? Meaning it's, the whole point is to preserve the work for future generations, not to try to make it as infeasible as possible. So we want to encourage preservation, not discourage preservation. And so to say, well, you need to make it copy it onto another disk where there's going to be more disk rot, as opposed to making a server copy where you're going to have, there will certainly be maintenance, but in the long run, less maintenance and more security. It just, in terms of what the whole point of the exercise is, it makes no sense.
Ms. McCluskey?
I agree with what Mr. Band said, but I would say that a copy onto a different DVD is obviously a possibility and something that we would be very, very happy to do. And I think that I just like to say that, yes, windowing, we recognize all those things. And I have yet to meet a librarian who would say, I would rather use my crummy preservation copy than buy a new remastered, wonderful edition of this thing. Like, that just doesn't, that doesn't happen. So we are not trying to avoid purchase of the new latest edition. We are trying to preserve content that we cannot buy that doesn't have a latest edition. And if doing that onto a second DVD is what we do, then that's okay. It's not ideal, but it's okay.
Ms. Tanas?
I would agree with Sarah that it is okay to transfer to a DVD. That would be a stopgap that would be appealing to us. We have had issues having extensive experience with preservation copies of VHS tape to DVD, where the blank DVDs that are available to us, they also degrade over time. We've had issues with the opaque layer not being opaque enough to have reliable playback, even on our internal DVD players, which tend to be of good quality. So the blank discs have all of the same issues, if not more, that we've discussed about commercially produced DVDs.
Dr. Steffen?
Yes. And the other, so, we would be interested in having physical preservation copies to circulate for on-premises use. But even so, I don't think it's ultimately adequate because discs are also easily damaged during use, especially now that so much playback has shifted towards computer drives. It's surprisingly easy for the hub to become cracked. In fact, even though I'm very careful, that happened to me recently with the Blu-ray, and it happens to other users all the time. So if we have a copy that somebody needs to use, there's always some risk that that copy is going to get damaged during use. And if our one surviving preservation copy is damaged, then that again leaves us without any options. So that's why having a backup copy of the disk image would be really helpful, at least for long-term preservation.
Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of points. As Jonathan said, we have been having conversations and trying to narrow disagreements and collaborate, and I appreciate his time on that and everyone's comments today. That's always preferable to the alternative. And I like what he said, of course, about, they're not looking to include Disney titles that are likely to be reissued in this class and things of that nature, and that's very helpful. I think if you go back to the 108 study group consensus recommendations from a decade or so ago, there were some ways to address this issue of when something's available in the marketplace that go just beyond whether it's available on discs. They talk about whether it's available through a license model or a download model, for example, and also whether it's just a reusable copy that's available as opposed to a brand new copy, an unused copy. And so those are things that I think, if anything's considered in this space, which we're not endorsing, they would be helpful to look at that. There's also the security issues involved here and the specificity that might be required related to how these copies would be secured. And the 108 study group had some much more specific proposals involved there. as well. So, I think while this proposal is focused just on discs and what's available on discs, and I think that's a pretty robust market, our point of view is we should look beyond just discs because everything is available at the major studio level for the most part in some form or another. So researchers are not being prevented access. And so we would suggest it goes beyond just discs. But if we are going to focus on discs, I think the 108 study proposals also said that the replacement copy should be on a physical disc, not on a server. And so I would say if we're going anywhere with this one, that does make a lot of sense.
Mr. Marks?
Thank you. Just also to follow up with what Mr. Williams said, understanding everything and appreciating what the librarian said about the advantage of a server copy versus copy. I think one of the advantages of the disk copy in Section 108 is that then that replacement disk copy can clearly be used on-premises use. I think that's a little less clear with respect to a server copy, given that it would involve, reproduction and potential performance, and then those security issues about if you have lots and lots of in the clear copies on a server and the server's hacked, the market harm that it can cause. So it's just a matter of balancing these various factors, and I wanted to bring those. Thank you so much.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, thank you. Real quick, just to go back to this point that every 20 years you need to have another DVD copy. I don't think that's exactly accurate. I think that DVDs have been around now for 20 years or so, and most people, 99.9% of users are not finding that they need to replace their DVDs. And if you're going to copy the work onto another DVD, you're obviously going to take the time to choose a better DVD than probably was originally issued on. There are different forms of DVDs. The Library of Congress has an extensive report and study, ongoing study that, for archival preservation purposes, you would use a DVD Gold, which that disc itself is inherently superior to even the ones that are distributed in the commercial marketplace. Finally, as far as how many disc you should get, I mean, this is a quintessential question of Section 108. I mean, if you get to copy 3 copies for a replacement copy and your replacement copy goes bad, well, there is a certain limitation on how many copies you get.
Mr. Zambrano Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Bell. This question is for proponents and opponents if they'd like to chime in. I was just curious if you could talk about the availability of DVD players to play copies of those DVDs and how that availability will looks moving forward, say in the next 5 to 10 years and even upwards of 20 years.
Ms. Tanas?
The manufacturing data that we're seeing for DVD playback equipment is very similar to what we saw at the end of VHS. So these playback decks are really not being produced at a level that suggests they will be readily available to us for a long time to come. I would also say that the quality of the decks that you can get today is much lower than we saw in the past, especially in the mid-aughts to late aughts. They just will not play many of these burn discs reliably.
I want to move us along a little bit just because we have a lot of other topics that I'd like to cover. So if we have time, we can come back and discuss these issues at the end. The office has previously stated that Section 108's 3-copy limit doesn't adequately accommodate the requirements of modern digital preservation practices. Does anybody disagree with that statement? Or do we all agree that for digital preservation, more than 3 copies would be necessary. Mr. Band?
Yes, I would agree that with the office's statement, I think it's spot on that digital preservation does require more than 3, especially if you're including, intermediate and temporary copies. And it really, this really goes back to the previous question about, we're looking forward to the 21st century and sort of forcing people to use obsolete storage mediums, really just makes no sense. You should use the best technology, especially since we're trying to do a preservation of cultural heritage, which benefits all of us. It's not something that benefits libraries, right? This benefits society at large, and therefore, we should be able to use the best forms of preservation, which would be digital preservation. In other words, the server copies.
Mr. Williams?
Thank you. Yes, I think we're allowing preservation and replacement copies to overlap a lot, which they do not in Section 108. And our position is that for now, Section 108 is the law, and that's really what the Copyright Office should be looking at, although I understand there are recommendations out there about how to revise Section 108 and also views on what Section 107 covers. In terms of DISC being obsolete, I don't think that's accurate. And if you look at footnote 35 from our filing, we actually have a citation to LCA's website citing a story from April of last year talking about DVD and Blu-ray player sales jumping significantly during 2020. So as far as I'm aware, those players are going to be available in the marketplace for the foreseeable future. When it comes to the multi-copy issue for preservation or replacement copies, I think there are scenarios where you may need to make more than 3 copies to get to the end result of 1 copy that you can either use for preservation or for replacement purposes. But I think the 108 study documents over time essentially said the point of those changes would not be so that you can end up with a bunch of different copies. It would be so you can end up with 1 copy for the point of either preservation or replacement, and that the other copies should go away. And so that's essentially, I think, where we're coming from on this, is that even if you do want to go beyond current Section 108 and allow for more than the 3 copies, ultimately the goal, if you're going to go there, should be 1 copy for the given purpose at issue instead of several different copies. So it's a matter of addressing the, as Jonathan said, the temporary copies and things of that nature that require the steps along the path to get to 1 copy. It's not a matter of, having 6 copies at the end of the day.
And for the proponents, are you proposing a limit on the number of digital or server copies that could be made? Mr. Band?
Not specifically. I mean, we don't, we're basing this, the language of this exemption on the language of the software exemption. Certainly it's not our contemplation that there would be proliferation, right? That, I mean, the idea is, if you're, if you have 1 copy in your collection, that you would end up with 1 copy in your collection, and that only 1 copy could be used at a time, right? I mean, that's no one's envisioning that this should lead to a proliferation of copies. You know, the goal here is to maintain the status quo.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I just wanted to illuminate this one point on players, and we work with a lot of manufacturers. We're the people that license them to the technology. We have no sense that players are going to disappear. And whenever a new player, new format comes out, it is always backwards compatible. Well, at least so far, they've always been backwards compatible. So you have a Blu-ray player that will play a DVD.
I want to talk next about preemptive or preventative preservation. And I understand that the main argument from proponents is that preservation is better achieved if it occurs before there's any damage or deterioration to the disc. So how do you respond to that, opponents? Mr. Williams?
Yeah, thank you. I'll get the hang of this lower hand and raise hand thing eventually. I'm sorry, I have to keep remembering to go up and down on that. So I understand where the proponents are coming from on this issue. And I don't want to pretend like I don't. On the other hand, I think if you go back to the 108 study group recommendations and to what the Copyright Office did with those in 2017, there was an issue of fragility as opposed to something becoming obsolete or damaged before copies could be made by libraries. And that proposal, for better or for worse, has not gone anywhere legislatively. And so, you know, I think if there had been some cooperation legislatively at that level, perhaps we would have a section 108 that already refers to fragile copies, meaning copies that are likely or may go bad in the near future instead of already deteriorating copies. But we're not there legislatively right now. It's not in the statute. And so, you know, our position is that really 108 should be the bellwether that you look at in this proceeding. And if you consider fragility as opposed to what's already in the statute, you know, I think it would need to be defined pretty well in the case of discs. And I think that proposal in the studies and recommendations I mentioned was part of a package, right? So it was grouped along with the need to look not only to unused copies for replacements, but to usable copies. It was packaged with a proposal not only to look for physical discs, but for licensed streams or downloadable copies that are described as licensed in many instances. So that was part of a kind of package agreement or consensus, I think. And if you're going in that direction here, I think you'd want to look at that whole package.
Yeah, and we will touch a little bit more on streaming in just a moment. I will make the point real briefly that obviously Section 108 is not the only exception, and the office has considered fair use in the past in similar contexts. Mr. Band, were you raising your hand as well?
Yeah, well, I was just going to make the point as you just did that you know, 108 is not the be all and end all that's applicable. You know, the office has already determined that Section 107 is relevant in this context, and also I just wanted to reiterate the point that you know these materials, you know, are the track record has shown that they are inherently fragile, certainly relative to books. And you know, a book, you know, well preserved can last 100 years, go through numerous readings, whereas you know, it seems that most DVDs simply that's not the case. And so you know, the ability to a DVD seems to start deteriorating as soon as you get it. or if not right away, then very soon after that. So this, to some extent, is a bit of an academic discussion. These are fragile materials, and you need to be preserved.
I think the counter argument that I saw in the comments was that there is, we have to consider what was the benefit of the bargain when the disc was originally purchased, and the copyright owners sold the content on these discs for a relatively low price with the understanding that people would be using them generally for individual or family use, and that there wouldn't be further reproduction or distribution. So I want to give the proponents a chance to respond to that argument that I saw in the comments, especially as it relates to the idea of preemptive preservation. And Mr. Taylor and Mr. Marks, I will come to you after I give them a chance to respond. Mr. Band?
Well, the benefit of the bargain, I mean, the libraries invested, have invested millions of dollars buying DVDs. And again, they're not doing it for their own edification, right? It's so that it's for the use by students and researchers. And so, and again, as we've heard from the librarians here, from Ms. McCleskey and others, I mean, librarians are perfectly happy to buy newer formats when they become available, if they're available. The point here is that a lot of this material simply does not appear to be available in any other format. And so, again, it's to all of our benefit to make sure that the investment that the libraries made in buying these DVDs is preserved. I mean, it's not like we're asking for the studios to subsidize making the preservation copies. I mean, the libraries are going to spend their own money to make the preservation copies, but that it's because they're just not available anywhere else. And if they were available, believe me, the libraries would prefer to buy that rather than make these preservation copies. But when they're not available anywhere else, they want the ability to make these preservation copies. And again, it just doesn't, there is no harm to any market because they're not on the market.
Ms. Tanas?
I just want to emphasize that at the University of California, Berkeley, we spend more than $250,000 annually on licensing media content for our users, for our students, faculty, and staff. So $237,000 is spent licensing media. We're not seeking to not pay to use content. Much of this home video content, however, at this lower price point, it's not so much the full film that's being used, but rather clips or portions that are being written about in scholarship. They may be published in academic articles. They may be looked at critically by students in their papers. It's not so much the use of the full film, but what we might typically consider a fair use of feature film. So our highest users of our home video collections of Disney content and other content are actually ethnic studies classes, where students and scholars are looking at the representation of people in film.
Dr. Stefan?
Yes, with regard to the question of preemptive preservation, to get back to the concrete example that I gave of the Warner Brothers DVDs, so I mentioned that 198 of the 767 titles are out of print. In many cases, or most cases, they were only issued in that original edition from 2006 to 2009. They were never reissued. And I'm including, the Warner Archive manufacture on demand as a reissue. So those things I would consider in print because you can purchase a new copy. So the thing is with these discs is that we can't predict when they will go bad. And there isn't a clear correlation between whether a disc will be playable and whether there's clear signs of deterioration. I had discs with really patchy, visible deterioration on them that still played okay. And then other discs that looked basically normal that would not play all the way through at all. So like I think in that case where we had clear evidence that there were faulty pressings and the discs were no longer available, and then you can identify the plant that they were manufactured on by the code on the hub of the disc, then I think it would make sense for us to make preemptive preservation copies of those out of print discs to ensure that the content would continue to be available for access.
Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I would just like to go to that point right there that Dr. Stefan had used, is that when you have disc rot, he said correctly that you sometimes can indeed play something that looks like it has visible disc rot. And disc rot, it can be from the holes, it looks like little termite holes, or it can be the colorization on the bands, or it can even be the disc peel. Just because you see that doesn't mean you can't play it, but it is a clear sign that maybe you should take some action. Now, as far as the printing, if it's a manufacturer caused disc rot, generally speaking, then that relatively soon, as soon as you play it, that there is a print error and that was manufactured incorrectly. So you still have time in the marketplace to go out and find a replacement copy or send it back or participate in any of the other programs when there's a manufacturing problem.
Right, could I just follow up on that? And Mr. Marks, you can address this too if you'd like. So, I mean, to the opponents, I take it that your view is that it would be, I'm trying to understand what the parameters are of your objection. So would you agree that it's a non-infringing use to the extent that this activity is consistent with 108C? So under 108C, it says you have to, the preservation right only applies if the copy is damaged, deteriorating, lost, or stolen. So what does that mean in practice? I mean, and you know, how do you respond to Dr. Stefan's point that you know, it may not always be quickly, you know, it may not always be clear whether a copy is deteriorating. I guess I'm trying to understand what you're suggesting that any exemptions should say and what should be required of libraries. Should they have to make a case-by-case analysis to determine whether each disc is in fact deteriorating under your view?
Yes, I think absolutely it should be on a case-by-case basis. And as I said earlier, there are two causes for disc rot: manufacturing error and storage error. So if we're talking about disc rot from storage error, meaning that you can see visibly that something's going on here, then that's an opportunity for you to say, okay, can we still play this and can we still preserve it? Now, if it's the other kind of disc rot that is a misprint where the adhesives aren't sticking together or it's not playing all the way through, you know that usually when you start playing it. And finally, I would just like to say that, you know, DVD has been the most successful product, home video product there has ever been. And we don't see this marketplace crying out that they have all these DVDs that aren't working. 99.9% of DVDs, when they're kept right, stored correctly, not left in a car, not left in an attic, not left in humidity, they're going to work perfectly fine. And we've seen this now for 20 years. So there's no reason not to expect them to continue to work.
Mr. Marks?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to, I think there's been a little bit of back and forth about the preservation under Section 108 and its existing preservation, which we're not opposing. Obviously, that's the law, but that goes to the disc copy. when we talk about, well, there's more than 108 at issue, there's also section 107 and fair use. I think our issue there is that, you know, in the existing court law, case law, space shifting of entire copies has not been found to be fair use. So that is our problem with the server copy. And it's not just a matter of standing on that legal principle. It's the notion that if you're proactively preserving thousands of titles onto a server, you know, that does cause a certain amount of threat, particularly if the server is hacked.
But so could I just follow up on that? So 108 doesn't say anything about the format needing to stay the same. So if we were just in 108 land, libraries would already, I think, tell me if you disagree, be entitled to make server copies as long as it's only 3 copies. Is that, do you agree with that? Is your objection to the idea that there could be more than 3 copies involved?
Well, I think, and maybe Mr. Williams can help me out here, or Mr. Taylor, but I had frankly read 108 that to be referencing physical copies rather than server copies. But you folks are much more the experts than I am in the copyright office. So I could have been misreading that.
Mr. Williams?
Thank you. So 108 as it exists now has a preservation provision and a replacement provision. And the preservation provision is about unpublished materials, which is not what we're discussing here today. And the replacement provision only applies to copies that are already damaged or deteriorating, which is also more limited than what we're talking about here today. I would agree with Dean Marks that I think as 108 was written, it intended for a replacement copy to actually be a replacement in a similar medium. I think there is room for debate on that question. If you go to the 108 study group's recommendations, for example, they do focus on keeping it in the same medium, keeping a physical copy. And I think that was a consensus position amongst not just copyright owners, but the whole 108 study group. So that's where I would come out on it. I would also just like to say that in terms of this question of what does 108 allow now, we do think that should be the focus that you guys have, but this proceeding requires more than just establishing a lawful use, right? So there's multiple steps in the process. You get a lawful use, you have to look at available alternatives, and you have to look at the 1201 factors. And so I would say, even if you can establish a lawful use under 108, which as I mentioned, does not go as far as they would like to, as I think they concede, you'd have to look at those other alternatives, which we think would include downloads, streams, etc. And then just finally, because I think what Mr. Steffen said was impactful, I wanted to try to address it. I don't remember the exact numbers that he gave, but he said basically a very large percentage of his collection of Warner Brothers titles he could not get in any format through manufacturer on demand or otherwise. And unless I'm missing something, I don't think the entirety of that collection is set forth in the comments. But of the ones that we were given in their comments that we looked at, we could find a lot of them on new discs. And footnote 32 of our comments points to the ways you can get Joan Crawford Collection Volume 2 on new discs, as well as other titles. And so I'm not questioning his good faith search, but if we had the complete list of titles, we might find more of them are actually available. So that's all I wanted to say.
I want to move us along, just for the sake of time, to talking about the marketplace check that's included in the proposed exemption. And I'll just cut to the chase. I want to give both sides a chance to talk about why streaming services either should or should not be considered as viable replacement copies. And a related point, in the Library Copyright Alliance's reply, it made a textual argument about Section 108C1, that the term unused replacement refers to a material object. I would like some further explanation of that just to make sure I understand the argument. Why don't we start with Mr. Band?
Sure. So at the highest level, many of the streaming services simply aren't available to libraries. So Netflix, Amazon, and so forth, they do not, their streaming services are not available to libraries. They're only for for personal use, and a library can't do that, so libraries can't access that. So a huge tranche of the videos that might be out there simply are not accessible to libraries. Swank, of course, does make some available, but the titles it has are more limited. And the other problem with the service, any kind of service, is that the titles change over time. It just depends on what titles are available at that service at that time. And licensing arrangements are changing all the time, and demands, the market demand changes. And we all have this frustration, right? That there's a film we wanted to watch on Netflix, and we put it on our list, and then lo and behold, when we finally got around to it, it was gone, right? I mean, we all experience that. And so this is, there's nothing surprising about that. And so for that reason, these streaming services just can't be considered reliable for the purpose of making sure that material is available in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years for serious academic research. With respect to 108, it says, it does talk about copies, and copies seems to me to mean physical copy. I mean, that's the definition of copies. And so a stream is not a copy. It's a performance. And so it seems that that's certainly what's contemplated. But even if it wasn't what's contemplated, certainly in terms of what is practical here, again, given what the goal is of preservation. And then let me just add the final point is, again, as we've been saying, if it is available in the market in a usable format, that the library is going to do that. That's what they're going to always prefer that. And so there's really not going to be any meaningful harm to any market, because we're only talking about things that are pretty much out of commerce.
Ms. McCluskey?
Streaming is in no way an adequate replacement for a physical ownership of a DVD or a content. One of the problems is that if we license something from Swank, for example, a student cannot make a clip of that content and download it and include it in a presentation as with fair use for some sort of comment or criticism. And it's the same with the other educational streaming services, which are wonderful services. And I would say that my library, we are a mid-sized private tuition-driven institution. We spend in a normal year over $60,000 on acquiring licensed video content. The vast majority of that is through streaming platforms. And in the pandemic year, we spent an additional $20,000, a large chunk of which went to Swank, a large chunk to Canopy, a large chunk to Criterion Pictures. So, you know, this is not us trying to avoid spending money. We are attempting to preserve content. And the other point I wanted to make was that we are very used to doing this on a case-by-case, title-by-title basis. We are very comfortable looking at the disc and not just the disc in its condition, but the content of the disc and what it's offering to the users, and whether that's the extra content, whether it's the commentary in the booklet that came with it. It's the whole package. And so streaming is wonderful for many things, and we certainly don't frown upon it. And in fact, I mean, at Hofstra, it's the preferred format for us, even for acquisition. I will buy a life of file license for $500 or $600 or $700 for a title, you know, rather than licensing it temporarily or buying a DVD. But when it comes to actually physical ownership, being able to use the thing as a physical object, streaming is not a replacement. Thanks.
Dr. Steffen?
Yes, I just wanted to underscore the unpredictability of the marketplace with titles. So yes, if you're talking about something, you know, that's like part of the major catalog of a studio, it's likely it's going to be available through Swank for a long time. So you can license it, you know, on a semester basis or year-long basis if you wish. But titles do become no longer available. And in fact, I just had an example this spring where someone wanted to use the film The Graduate by Mike Nichols in a course. And that film is complicated because the rights, as far as I understand, are jointly owned by MGM and Studio Canal. And it was released on DVD and Blu-ray by the Criterion Collection. And there's individual streaming available on, say, Amazon Prime that's through Lionsgate. But when I approached Swank, assuming that since it's Lionsgate and Swank works with them, I'd be able to get it, they came back to me and they said, no, they lost the rights to that some time back. So we couldn't even license it for the semester to make available for a class, much less, you know, a long-term streaming access for the collection. And that's all just because the film has been acquired by different studios over the years, and the current configuration doesn't make it amenable for academic or library streaming.
One last point I wanted to make about the market check. It did seem to me like there was some tension between the idea of preemptive preservation on the one hand, or the need for preemptive preservation on the one hand, and also the idea that you're doing a market check to see if there are any replacement copies available. I'm not sure this is really a question, but if anybody wants to speak to that, it seems like there's some tension between those two ideas. Ms. Tanaz?
I would say that our priority in searching is always the goal of licensing and acquiring a new copy. That is how I approach all my curatorial work, is to make content accessible. And the first choice is always to license and purchase. And we have documented approaches to, we have a Mellon-funded project that showed where do you look to try to find where things are sourced. We have communities of practice that support librarians in finding out how to acquire films. So our goal is always to acquire a new legal copy to license when possible. It's only when you can't find something that you begin to think of a preservation copy.
Mr. Band?
Yeah, if I just might add that the I understand your point about the tension, but it's the point is that a library isn't going to just say, okay, we're now going to be preserving all of our collection. I mean, that's just not realistic. That's not how it's going to go about things. It's going to go saying, well, you know, here's some films. Maybe it's, you know, this film isn't in great condition. Is it, you know, if we're using the terminology of 108, I mean, is it damaged, deteriorating, lost, or stolen? Well, it's not lost or stolen, hopefully. You know, how damaged is damaged, how deteriorated is deteriorating, right? So it might be a little deteriorating, a little damaged, but that might be enough to say, you know what, this is something we want to make sure we have in the future. Let's do a market check. And then they do a market check and say, no, we can't, there's nothing in the market. And then they might say, okay, let's preserve it, meaning it is going to be on a case-by-case basis. And you know, again, because these terms are not completely black and white, you know, is it damaged enough to meet 108, you know, the 108 standard, but maybe it isn't damaged enough to meet the 108 standard. But that's why we would want the flexibility to say, well, it should be preventative, meaning if it's a little damaged, but not unreadable, right? You know, again, because it's so much of 108 is based on books, right? And with the book, even if a book is in pretty bad condition, you can still read it, right? Or you can sort of assemble different chapters from different books and put it together. You can't do that with the DVD, right? If parts of it are deteriorated, it's gone. It's useless. And so a little bit of deterioration is very problematic with a DVD in a way that it isn't with a book. And so to some extent, it's the issue with preventative deterioration, preventative preservation really goes to that we're not, you know, it's not, they're not completely analogous.
I want to thank Mr. Evian and Ms. Nelson for their patience. We are finally getting to you. We're going to talk a little more about the current marketplace for licensing. So why don't we start with Swank? And Mr. Evian, I'm going to allow you to share your screen so that you can talk through some slides that you prepared.
Yep, and Barb, why don't you kick us off? I'll share this screen, Barb.
Sure. Thank you. I think it's important to note that Swank has been providing this service that Mr. Evian is about to show for just over 9 years. And although we are probably most known for the Hollywood content, we also have agreements with distributors that are very niche, several American independent, foreign distributors, and our collection actually is just under 40,000. So and when we are working with our clients, currently we're in over 1,000 colleges and universities throughout the US, it is very rare that we are asked for a picture that we do not represent. I know it was mentioned earlier about The Graduate. Yes, that of course, from time to time, there are some very tricky ones, The Graduate being one of those. But that is very rare. And it generally is about 1% of the time where we are unable to provide a piece of content that has been requested by a client. So with that, Bill, would you like to kind of get into the details of how the service works?
Thank you, Barb. I will. The main thing here is this is in regards, the product is called Swank Digital Campus. And this is something we use and work with from a librarian standpoint. So we engage the institution, the university, the school, for content that is going to be used for academic purposes. In in the past, things, it was mentioned beforehand, things were used like movie reels, then VHS, then DVDs and Blu-rays. A lot of problems with these physical forms is you have to consume an entire class to view that content with the students there. The world and generally what we do now is a digital world where the content is licensed for academic purposes, and the studios make available their catalogs for us to use, whether it's on DVD or not. We can have access to their full catalogs of content. And we work with the librarians on a set list of content that they have worked with their instructors to bring onto the site. And then we make this available. And when it's in a digital form like this, and us working with the studios, we're able to maintain the studio content protections, the encryptions or the DRM that is required. And it allows a lot of other niceties in that we're able to provide a number of languages, ADA compliant content as well with closed captioning. And so this is a view that the instructors or the librarians would see of the content that was chosen by that institution for that semester or that year. And the instructors are then able to view the titles that are available to them for their classes. And they are also able to see some details about that. And then they're also able to view this themselves. Viewing includes, again, different languages, closed captioning, abilities to, cast to a television, like a Chromecast, further details about the title, and they can stop, start, play this as many times as they want. A professor or an instructor is then able to share this with their students, either by a direct link or a link that goes into their learning management system, which a lot of them use, whether it's K-12 or whether it's more academic institutions. They make that content available. The student then in turn is able to view this title as many times as they want during the semester, during the school year, and more importantly, different than let's say a DVD or a Blu-ray in the class and the student needing to be there, a student can view this and consume this content on their personal device outside of the classroom, and still have those, none of those restrictions on number of plays, and they can jump to any point in the film as they wish. From there, let's say a professor or an instructor finds a title, has a title the librarian has not procured. In that case, we expose out our entire catalog of content, those titles, 40,000 plus titles that Barb mentioned, and they can find a title, see the details about it, and you'll see that blue request button there on the bottom, make a request to that title. That request then gets sent as an email to the librarian of the institution. It's their job to procure these digital assets, and they can approve or not approve that, and then that title will then be fulfilled by Swank and made available. It is also possible for the librarians or the admins of this at this institution to completely customize this. They can put it in their own categories of content. They can also get full reports on the usage, how those titles are used, how often and when. And then they can customize this and brand it completely as their own look and feel, their own logos, so it appears like an application, any other application within their institution. So this is a very high level 3-minute view of the solution. It's actually very deep and something that is constantly in continuous development. Also along with the studios in making sure that the security, the protections, the encryptions, the digital rights management is to the latest and always protecting the content. That's the most important. Thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much. And I know Mr. Taylor also had a short presentation about Hoopla and Canopy.
All right, before I share my screen, I may lose my sound, and hopefully you guys will continue with sound. So somebody raise their hand and let me know that the sound's not working if that's the case.
Hi everyone, this is Donna, Technology and Media Librarian for Upper Arlington Public Library. In this video, I'll show you how you can connect your Hoopla and Canopy accounts to your streaming media device so that you can stream free movies and television shows from your TV rather than using your phone or your tablet. Hoopla and Canopy are two of the free services that are available to you with your Upper Arlington Public Library card. Hoopla has movies and television episodes that you can stream, while Canopy has thousands of independent films and documentaries also available for you to stream. Hoopla overall will offer you access to both music and audiobooks as well as movies and TV, but only movies and television will be available to stream from your TV. So in this case, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for one of my favorite romantic comedies, which is also my favorite genre of movie, and that is Amelie. And now once you find a movie that you like, you searched for it, you see it in your results, you're just going to click on it to select it. You can see the title details for that movie. And then when you're ready to check it out, and this includes movies or television episodes, you'll click borrow and then play, and it'll start streaming. You can borrow up to 10 items total on your UAPL Hoopla account every month. So that would include movies, television episodes. It would also include any audiobooks or ebooks or comics or music albums that you decide to check out as well. And your borrows will reboot every calendar month. Adding Canopy to your Roku or to your other streaming device will be the same process. You'll return to your Roku home screen and open the Canopy app. So then when you return to the Canopy app on your Roku, you can start browsing to see what movies are available. Now, unlike Hoopla, Canopy is exclusively movies, and that includes more than 20,000 feature films and documentaries. It also includes unlimited access to the Great Courses education series and a selection just for kids on Canopy. Like Hoopla, you can borrow 10 movies per month on your account using your Upper Arlington Public Library card. And you can browse through the selection. You can browse for different subject matters. You can browse for different categories. You can see some of the carousels that they have pre-selected for you. And of course, you can click on the magnifying glass to search for a movie by name directly. Once you find a movie that you'd like to borrow, click on it, and then you'll see that there's a description of it. You can add it to your watch list. You can also click to see a much more expanded description, but all you'd need to do to officially borrow it is press the play button, and then it'll begin streaming on your device. And of course, you can go back and see what else is available on your watch list. That's sort of like, don't forget about these movies, or a save for later list, and you can also go back and see what you're currently watching. So that's it. That's how you can enjoy Hoopla and Canopy on a streaming media device for your television.
All right.
Thank you.
I would just like to point out the distinction of those services versus the Netflix. These services are a pay-per-use service, and Netflix and Prime, Amazon, they're subscription services. So you don't necessarily see the same phenomenon with these services that you do with Netflix and Prime, because they have an all access and those movies are only available for a certain time period, and that's why they disappear. When you're using another business model, such as pay per use, it's less likely that those models are going, that those movies and titles are going to disappear.
So I see we have a couple of folks who wanted to comment. Let me just pose a specific question to you. I'm interested in hearing what kind of uses by the university community are not being are not provided for through these services that we just saw presentations about. And why don't we start with Ms. McCleskey?
Sure, thanks. And I will start by saying that Hofstra is a pretty robust customer of both Swank Digital Campus and Canopy. Hoopla, of course, is mainly in public libraries. Canopy's in both. Also, I'm on the Digital Campus Streaming Service Advisory Committee, as well as the Canopy Content Advisory Board. So I have some relative degree of familiarity with these services, and they're great, but they don't have everything. And I think for Swank to assert that they can fulfill 99% of requests is really disingenuous, because Swank doesn't own 99% of the content or license 99% of the content. Canopy has the Criterion collection. Criterion Pictures USA has 20th Century Fox. And all these things, to some extent, titles move around from service to service as rights are sold. But there is no platform that has everything. That's why we have Canopy, and we have Swank, and we have Alexander Street Press, and we have Films on Demand, and other platforms. So the point is, no one has everything, and a lot of content, no one has it, period. So there are things I just can't get on the streaming services that we that are taught, and that's where we sort of fall down in trying to say, well, streaming is an adequate substitution for our entire DVD collection, because that's just not the case.
Ms. Tanas?
I agree that these are fabulous platforms that we rely on to provide day-to-day access to our students and researchers and instructors. I have a mug here that I'm not showing on screen because it is from one of these providers. I am also on the Canopy Content Advisory Board. For me, a robust, healthy video marketplace and educational video marketplace is incredibly important, because that is the content that we are able to provide to our users, and we put a lot of money into it. But even with the video of the Canopy platform that is focused on public libraries, there is content that is available to public libraries through Canopy that is not available to academic institutions. So I saw titles on there that are not available to me for licensing on UC Berkeley's Canopy platform. And the reality is that these platforms tend to not own the copyright on their films. So they are using licensing agreements to make them available. Titles that I had licensed from Canopy last year are no longer available to me to license this year. So the content does go out of print, and my preference is always for that highest quality video stream to make available to our highest number of users. I see this on-site preservation access simply as a stopgap, one that is not ideal.
Dr. Stefan?
Yeah, to speak to this issue of streaming video availability, one of the areas where I've been seeing a lot of challenges is actually PBS educational documentaries, because they're produced by, they're sometimes independently produced. There's limited licensing agreements, which enable for PBS broadcast and home video releases. So we do buy the physical item on DVD. And as you may know, they often have special licenses that allow for public performance rights on campus as well. But when we try to license the videos for streaming, we're often finding that when we reach out to the individual studio, they can't license it to us because of some underlying rights issues. And the availability of the content has also shifted a lot over the last several years. Like, there was a large collection on Canopy that went away. There's a good number of titles on Alexander Street Press. I believe there's some titles on Films Media Group as well, but the availability is spotty, and the track record for licensing individual titles for streaming is not great. So we don't have a high success rate for things that are not already available on one of those platforms.
Mr. Band?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, this is a point that some of the librarians made before, but whereas these platforms are great for in-classroom use to allow students in classes to see videos, It's not great for research purposes, especially if you want to make clips for inclusion in scholarship, because my understanding is that those rights aren't included. And so, so if you're a scholar and you want to make a clip, you really can't use these services.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, I find that point very interesting because we have an entire 1201 proceeding that says that they can indeed make clips from those services. So, I'm baffled by that. But I would also point to the fact that these services, they are young. DVDs have been around for 20 years. These services are 5, 6 years old. I think you have to keep that in mind. You had asked earlier, is it fair to do a market check and say, if the videos are available on streaming services, should that count? And the history of this proceeding has always been, yes, if it's available in another format to the user. We spent the first 2 or 3 proceedings considering whether or not titles on DVDs were still available on VHS. So I see it completely analogous and consistent to say that if it is available on the streaming service, then that should count.
Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you. Just quickly on a few topics. We were discussing The Graduate and whether it was available on Swank or not. As best I can tell from a quick search, it's available new on discs. So at least for purposes of this exemption proposal, we wouldn't even need to get to whether it's available on a streaming service because you can still buy the Blu-ray and DVD copies of The Graduate brand new on Amazon. So the market check would result in people being able to acquire that. I agree with Mr. Taylor that when it comes to clips, we do have separate exemptions that deal with that issue that cover both discs and online transmissions. So I think clips are already addressed through those other exemptions. With respect to the issue that not any given streaming service or download service has access to every title, that's true, and I can see why it's frustrating and can be somewhat time consuming. But to me, that is evidence of a market that is working properly. The fact that not every title from every copyright owner is available on only one service means there's competition. There are multiple services developing. They are trying to win the market competition and prove that they're the best service. And so there's a healthy market there that we need to continue to allow to develop. And then just a couple of final points on kind of the scope of what's been proposed in the exemption. We've expressed opposition to it generally today, but I do think a couple of things came through in the testimony and the comments that if you were inclined to consider it, would be important for you to think about. One is we've heard a number of times that really what the focus of this proposal is research uses by academics in university settings. And so any exemption that's considered, I think you'd want to consider limiting it in some fashion to those types of uses and defining research in some way that is meaningful so that you're not dealing with just entertainment uses of motion pictures, et cetera. And then we have good representatives from university libraries here today, and they've given compelling testimony, but we don't have really examples of the need for this throughout all libraries, archives, and museums. And so I think those are 2 limitations worth considering. Finally, the fact that Netflix is offered to consumers is true. It's a personal use subscription model, but as I've mentioned in other panels, circumventing things is not allowed by the terms of use either. So when we hear, terms of service as a limitation, it doesn't necessarily compel me because one way or another, somebody's hacking something they're not supposed to hack here or using something in a way they're not supposed to use it. So that would be my last thought on that.
All right, we're going to give Ms. Tanas and then Mr. Band the last word.
I wanted to speak to that question of the ability to make clips on platforms. That is an option to authenticated users at institutions who have those platforms. But if we're talking about scholars publishing articles and the questions of screenshots, while copyright is at play, university libraries enter into licensing terms with each of these platforms that prevent clipping that is outside of the platform. So the viewing must be done by authenticated users within the platform. And the question of taking screenshots, for my awareness of all of our licenses and purchase agreements, is not an option on any of these platforms. So that streaming surrogate is not a good option for these regular elements of the scholarly conversation and scholarly publishing.
Mr. Band?
Yes, if I could just respond to another aspect of the existing exemption for clips. Yes, you can circumvent CSS for the purpose of getting a clip. But this is here the problem is that the content might have disappeared, might no longer be available by the time you need to make that clip, right? Because you're trying to, it needs to be preserved before you can make a use of it. So the existing clip compilation, existing exemption for purposes of making clips doesn't address the problem here, because the content might not be around in order to make that clip in the first place.
Before I pass it over to Mr. Amer, I just want to thank everybody very much for their participation. You definitely kept it lively and interesting, at least from my perspective. So thank you very much. And I'll pass it to Mr. Amer.
Yes, thank you all very much for participating. It was, I agree, it was a very helpful discussion from our perspective. We are going to adjourn for now, and we will be back at 1 o'clock to talk about class 14. Thanks very much.